All right, welcome to your very own deep dive. You specifically requested ancient biblical law.
Oh, exciting.
That's what we're doing today. Cracking open Leviticus chapter 24.
Oh, okay.
And we'll unpack not just the rules, but what they tell us about the society that created them.
Yeah.
And to add another dimension, we've got commentary from Matthew Henry,
Oh,
a
interesting.
scholar writing in the 1700s.
Okay, yeah. So we're really going back in time.
Yeah, it's like we're time travelers peeking into their world.
Exactly.
And Leviticus, it's not just a list of thou shalt nots. It's a guide to how the Israelites lived, worshipped, and structured their entire existence.
Yeah, their whole lives. So
It starts off, honestly, with what seem like pretty mundane instructions, like how to keep the temple lamps burning and what to do with the showbread.
yeah.
And honestly, on the surface, it sounds a little dry,
Right.
but I have a feeling there's more to it and meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely.
What do you think?
Yeah, you have to remember that the temple was considered God's dwelling place on earth.
Okay.
So everything within it, down to the smallest detail, was imbued with symbolic meaning.
Oh, I see.
So the constantly burning lamps represented God's unwavering presence, a beacon of light and guidance.
Right, right.
And the showbread, or the bread of presence, was a ritual offering, replaced each Sabbath.
Okay, so they weren't just keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
They were actively reaffirming their connection to the divine through these actions.
Right.
Like every chore was an act of worship.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It was all very much tied into their relationship with God.
Interesting.
And then Matthew Henry, with his 18th century perspective, sees even deeper layers.
Uh-huh.
He connects the showbread to Christ, calling him the bread of life.
Oh, wow.
It's fascinating how even practical instructions could be interpreted as foreshadowing core Christian beliefs.
Yeah, does that make you wonder if they saw those connections at the time?
Right.
Or if it's something that emerges when you view these texts through a different lens centuries later?
It's a great question. That's the beauty of studying ancient texts, isn't it? They offer endless layers of meaning,
Yeah.
depending on who's reading them and when.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, speaking of layers, things take a bit of a turn in the next section.
Okay.
We go from temple maintenance to a story about a man who blasphemed God's name.
Okay.
And let's just say the punishment doesn't exactly fit the crime by today's standards.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder of how seriously they took offenses against God.
Right.
You know, this wasn't just hurling insults.
Yeah.
This was seen as a direct attack on their entire societal structure,
I see.
which was built on a covenant with God.
Right. And they didn't mess around when it came to consequences.
No, they did not.
Stoning someone to death for words alone seems incredibly harsh to our modern sensibilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It does. But it highlights a concept that was central to their worldview,
Okay.
collective responsibility.
Okay.
The entire community participated in the punishment,
Right.
emphasizing that upholding religious sanctity was everyone's duty.
So it wasn't just
Yeah.
just the priests or leaders.
Exactly. It was everyone.
It's interesting, though, that the text mentions this man's parents.
Okay.
His father was Egyptian and
Uh-huh.
his mother was Israelite.
Yeah.
I can't help but wonder if his mixed heritage might have played a role in how his actions were perceived.
Oh, that's a good point.
Did being an outsider, so to speak, make him more vulnerable?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something we can't definitively answer,
Right.
but it does make you think about the nuances of their social dynamics.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
Were individuals with mixed heritage fully integrated into the community?
Yeah.
Or were they seen as somehow different?
It adds another layer of complexity to this already fascinating story.
It does.
And it speaks to the broader question of how they treated, quote, strangers or
Yep.
foreigners in their midst, which we'll explore a little later.
Yeah, definitely.
But for now, let's shift gears and delve into one of the most well-known and often misunderstood aspects of Leviticus, the concept of an eye for an eye, or lex talionis.
Right, yeah. This principle is often seen as brutal,
Yeah.
even barbaric, through a modern lens.
Right.
But it's crucial to understand it within the context of their time and legal system.
Okay.
Remember, this was a world without established courts or police forces as we know them.
So it was less about seeking revenge
Right.
and more about establishing a system of proportionate justice in a world that could feel pretty chaotic.
Precisely.
Okay.
The idea was to create a deterrent for violence.
Yeah.
And ensure that the punishment fit the crime,
Right.
preventing escalating cycles of retribution.
Now, even within this system,
Right.
there's a clear distinction between the punishment for killing a man versus killing an animal.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about their values?
Well, it shows how highly they valued human life.
Mm-hmm.
Killing a person wasn't just a property crime.
Right.
It was a transgression against God and society,
Okay.
demanding the most severe punishment. Killing an animal, while still requiring restitution,
Yeah.
was seen as a different category of offense.
So human life was paramount, but they had a system for dealing with other offenses as well.
Right.
It's like they were trying to create a framework for maintaining order and fairness,
Yes.
even if their methods seem harsh to us now.
Exactly. What's particularly intriguing
Okay.
is that verse 22 explicitly states that the same law applies to both Israelites and the, quote, stranger living among them.
Interesting.
It almost sounds like a radical notion of equality for their time.
It really does. What did you say? Yeah, but it also raises the question,
Right.
was this principle truly applied equally in practice?
Right.
Or was it more of an aspirational ideal?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's impossible to know for sure.
Right.
But it does suggest an awareness, at least on a theoretical level, that justice should extend beyond their own tribe.
It makes you wonder how that principle played out in specific cases, like the blasphemy incident we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
Would the outcome have been different if the offender had been a full-blooded Israelite rather than someone with Egyptian heritage?
Tough to say.
We'll probably never know for sure.
Probably not.
It's one of those historical mysteries that keeps us guessing.
Yeah.
And speaking of perspectives,
Okay.
before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Right.
I'd love to get your take on Matthew Henry's commentary.
Yeah.
His writings offer a fascinating glimpse into how someone from the 1700s interpreted these ancient laws.
That's right.
Yes, let's hear what Mr. Henry had to say.
Okay.
I'm particularly curious about his take on the blasphemy law and his views on what he calls wicked people.
Right.
Especially since he was writing from a very different social and religious context.
Very different, yeah. Well, strap in, because Matthew Henry has some strong opinions.
Oh, okay.
But we'll save that juicy conversation for the next part of our deep dive. For now, I'd like to leave you with this. What stood out to you most about these laws so far? Do they seem completely foreign to you? Or can you see any echoes of these ancient principles in our own legal systems and moral frameworks? Think about that.
Yeah, something to ponder.
And we'll pick up right here in the next part.
Awesome.
Okay.
Great.
So picking up where we left off, it's fascinating to consider Matthew Henry's perspective on these ancient laws. He was writing centuries after they were first inscribed.
Yeah.
Yet he clearly found them relevant to his own time and struggles.
It's like he's building a bridge between these seemingly distant worlds, right? And the way he connects the showbread to Christ, the bread of life. It's almost like he's saying these ancient rituals were a foreshadowing of Christian beliefs.
That's exactly what he's doing. For Henry, the Old Testament wasn't just a historical document. It was a prefiguration of the New Testament.
Oh.
So even the seemingly mundane details about keeping the temple lamps burning or preparing the showbread held deep theological significance.
It really highlights how people have been interpreting and reinterpreting these texts for centuries, finding meaning and guidance for their own lives and times. Which makes me wonder, what can we glean from these laws today, even if we don't subscribe to the same belief system as the ancient Israelites or Matthew Henry?
That's the beauty of engaging with these ancient texts. They can spark so many questions and insights. For me, one thing that stands out is the emphasis on accountability. Whether it's the meticulous care of the temple, the harsh punishment for blasphemy, or the principle of an eye for an eye, there's this clear sense that actions have consequences, both for individuals and for the community as a whole.
It wasn't just about blind obedience, it was about understanding the impact of your choices, right? And that idea, I think, is just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago.
Absolutely. We might not have the same legal codes or religious beliefs, but the principle of taking responsibility for our actions, understanding that they have a ripple effect on others, is something that transcends time and culture.
Of course, we can't ignore the fact that some of these laws, especially the punishments, seem shockingly harsh by modern standards. Stoning someone for blasphemy just isn't something we'd condone today.
Right. But it's important to approach these texts with a sense of historical perspective. These laws were developed in a very different time and place, reflecting the social norms and understanding of justice of that era.
So how do we reconcile those seemingly barbaric practices with the idea that there's wisdom to be gleaned from these texts? Do we just pick and choose what feels palatable to our modern sensibilities?
I think it's a matter of separating the principles from the specific applications. We can appreciate the underlying values, the importance of respect, accountability, and justice, without endorsing the sometimes brutal methods used to enforce them.
It's like trying to extract the timeless essence of these ideas without getting bogged down by the cultural baggage of the past. We can appreciate the message without necessarily condoning the messenger, so to speak.
Exactly. The key is to approach these texts with a critical and discerning eye, recognizing both their historical context and their potential for contemporary relevance.
Now, speaking of contemporary relevance, you mentioned earlier that Matthew Henry had some strong opinions about wicked people. What exactly did he have to say about that?
Well, for Henry, wickedness was anything that went against God's will and commandments.
Okay.
He believed that associating with wicked people could lead one astray from a righteous path. In his commentary, he specifically warns against connecting with those who blaspheme or disregard God's laws.
It makes sense within his religious framework, but it raises a fascinating question for us today. How do we define wickedness in a society that's much more diverse and less religiously homogenous?
Right, Henry's definition was very much rooted in his own time and belief system. Today, we might define it differently, focusing on actions that harm others or violate our shared values, regardless of one's religious beliefs.
So, while we might not share Henry's specific definition, his warning against negative influences still resonates, right? We all know people who can bring us down or lead us down paths we don't want to go down. And conversely, there are those who inspire us to be better versions of ourselves.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of the company we keep and how it shapes our choices and our character. I think that's a timeless insight, even if the way we define wickedness has evolved.
Now, I want to loop back to something you mentioned earlier about finding contemporary relevance in these ancient laws. It's easy to dismiss them as archaic and irrelevant to our lives today, but I think there's more to it than that. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. Even if we don't follow these laws literally, they can offer valuable insights into human nature, the challenges of building a just society, and the eternal struggle between doing right and wrong.
For example, the eye for an eye principle, while harsh in its literal application, speaks to that deep-seated human desire for fairness and accountability. We might express that desire differently today through our legal systems or social norms, but the underlying principle is still there.
And let's not forget the emphasis on caring for the stranger in their midst, extending justice and compassion beyond one's own tribe. That's an incredibly powerful idea, especially in our increasingly globalized and interconnected world.
It's a reminder that these texts, despite being written thousands of years ago in a very different context, can still speak to our modern concerns and aspirations.
They offer a window into those timeless questions that humans have grappled with for centuries. What's right and wrong? How do we create a just society? What does it mean to live a good life? And those questions are just as relevant today as they were in the time of Leviticus.
They force us to confront those fundamental dilemmas that we still grapple with today, both individually and as a society.
Precisely. And by engaging with these ancient texts, even if we don't agree with everything they say, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored the spiritual and practical implications of Leviticus chapter 24, delved into Matthew Henry's commentary, and considered the relevance of these ancient laws for our lives today.
We've also touched on some pretty big questions about justice, accountability, and the very nature of wickedness. It's important to acknowledge that there are no easy answers to these questions. They require careful thought and consideration, even some soul-searching.
Which is exactly what we're hoping to encourage with this deep dive. A thoughtful and engaging exploration of these complex ideas that are both ancient and surprisingly contemporary.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our exploration, I want to leave you with one more question to ponder. We've talked about this idea that the same law should apply to both the Israelite and the stranger. Do we live up to that ideal today? Or are there still ways in which we treat outsiders differently, either consciously or unconsciously? I encourage you to reflect on that as we head into the final part of our deep dive.
It really makes you think, how we treat those who are different from us.
It does, yeah. It's a challenge to really look at ourselves honestly and see those biases we might have.
It's easier to just point fingers at others, isn't it?
Oh, much easier.
Yeah.
But if this deep dive into Leviticus has shown us anything, it's that these issues of justice and compassion are timeless.
Yeah, they're not just ancient history.
No.
They're still happening today, all around us.
Exactly. We've made some progress, sure. The idea that everyone deserves equal treatment, no matter who they are or what they believe, that's something a lot of societies strive for.
Yeah.
But we also know that putting those ideals into practice,
Right.
well, That's a journey.
It is a journey, for sure.
It never really ends.
It's like we're always reaching for that vision of a truly just and equitable world,
Right.
but it's a constant work in progress.
It is.
Yeah.
And Leviticus chapter 24, even with all its ancient rules,
Yeah.
it reminds us of that struggle.
It's a reflection of that human desire for fairness, for a world where everyone is treated with dignity.
Absolutely.
So if we're using these ancient laws as a mirror to reflect on ourselves,
Okay.
what can we do as individuals
Yeah.
to move closer to that ideal? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by these big issues.
It is. It can feel daunting, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with something simple, something we often overlook.
What's that?
Self-awareness.
Mm.
We need to be honest about our own biases.
Yeah, those hidden assumptions we all carry.
Right. And those assumptions can really affect how we see and treat other people.
It's true. It's like you don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
Until you're willing to look inward and see those blind spots.
Yeah. And once you start to see them, you
Right.
got to be willing to challenge them, not just in your thoughts, but in your actions too.
So speaking up when we see injustice.
Yes. Even when it feels uncomfortable.
Checking ourselves when we make assumptions about people.
Exactly.
It's about taking that responsibility to create a better world.
It is. And it starts with each interaction, each choice we make.
It's about being the change, right? Like that old saying,
It might sound cliche,
yeah,
but it's true. If we want to live in a society that values justice and compassion,
right.
we have to start by living those values ourselves.
Beautifully said. And it's not just about those big gestures, those big societal shifts.
Yeah.
It's about those everyday choices.
Exactly.
How we treat the cashier at the store, what we say when someone disagrees with us.
Yeah. Those little things add up.
It's about being mindful, pausing and asking ourselves, am I treating this person with respect, with the same dignity I'd want for myself?
Exactly. And if the answer is no,
Yeah,
well, it's a chance to grow, to do better.
that's a great way to look at it. And it brings us full circle, doesn't it?
It does.
From these ancient biblical laws to our modern world.
Right.
That challenge of treating everyone fairly and with compassion, it's still with us.
It's woven into the human experience. And we may never achieve perfect equality,
Yeah.
but it's that pursuit of justice and compassion. That's what makes us human.
What a powerful thought. Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into Leviticus chapter 24. We explored these ancient laws,
Yeah.
delved into their historical context,
Right.
and considered what they might still teach us today.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation,
It has.
and I hope it's gotten you thinking too.
Yeah, because in the end, it's up to each of us to keep grappling with these questions, right?
It is.
To keep striving for that more just and compassionate world.
Absolutely. We'll leave you with that thought.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep seeking those deeper layers of understanding.
Thanks for listening.